Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt. My name is Matt and I'm joined by Stefan and Ewan to discuss Manchester United's imminent signing of Joshua Zirkzee. They're expected to sign the striker from Bologna by triggering his €40 million release clause. There's plenty to talk about who the player is and how he might fit into this Manchester United side. Stefan, I want to start with you and I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about the player that's looking to become Jim Ratcliffe's first major signing at Old Trafford.
Yeah, Zirkzee is a really interesting player. He came through at Bayern Munich's youth teams, came up the ranks, didn't quite make it at the club, technically, as a lot of young players don't, to be honest. I know Bayern Munich are, really well-run club, but their record for actually developing young players into the first team is actually pretty abysmal, to be honest. Jamal Musiala's a real kind of isolated example there. So, I wouldn't hold that against Zirkzee, is kind of what I'm saying here. He then obviously went off to Belgium, where he did tremendously well at Anderlecht, and then laterally he's been doing very well at Bologna as well. And as a result of that, he's been attracting a lot of interest around Europe. And Man Utd seems to be the club who will trigger that release clause and pick him up. And I think it's a really interesting move. I think Zirkzee will be delighted with the move. It's a huge step up for him. We've obviously seen Bologna developing a lot of young players. We just talked about another one in Calafiori, obviously, that video's already up on the YouTube channel. And, it'll be interesting to see how he makes that step up, because I don't really think his stats are outstanding. He's probably a player who maybe can't be defined as much by stats, because I think he does a lot of work off the ball. But we'll have to kind of wait and see how that kind of translates into performances at Manchester United, because they're not a club who are tremendously good at giving young players the time and scope, or at least they were before Ten Hag came along. He obviously has done a great job of developing a lot of young players. You can go through a whole bunch, Garnacho, Kobe Mino, and to an extent, obviously, Hojlund as well, who came from Serie A last season as well. But it'll be interesting to see what type of player Zirkzee develops into, because he does look like a kind of all-action, all-round forward, but not specifically maybe a goal scorer, which will be interesting to see whether that's a player who can partner Hojlund and get the best out of him, or perhaps a player who can offer a bit of competition, because, Man Utd do have a lot of forward players. A number of them are obviously moving on this summer, but they don't really have anyone who can kind of challenge Hojlund for that number 9 position. So it'll be interesting to see if he's ready to make that step up. And it'd be interesting to see what he brings to this Man United team that Hojlund doesn't.
There's a brilliant piece on our website about Joshua Zirkzee. I recommend everyone head over to Zirkzee's player profile on our website. You can head to the news section and you'll be able to read that. Ewan, I want to ask you, before we touch on how it might work at Man United, I want to get your thoughts as well on Joshua Zirkzee as a player.
Yeah, I think he's a fantastic young player who's had a really good season in Serie A with Bologna. Like Stefan mentioned, it's a massive step up, not only in terms of the league, but obviously the size of the club and the demands and the expectations that will be placed on him. I think the fact that Zirkzee did come through at Bayern Munich actually helps in that regard. He knows what it's like to be at a big club. He knows the demands, the size of the football club. So I actually think that's a factor that does help. In terms of Manchester United, they badly needed another number 9 in the summer. They only had Rasmus Hojlund last season, who came to the club as a 20-year-old. Ante Martial was unavailable for essentially the whole season. Marcus Rashford can play as a 9, but he's not best suited in that position. So being competition for number 9, I think, was really important. I thought Manchester United would actually go for a more experienced option, because going into next season, you've got two number 9s who are 23 years old and 21 years old, not all the experience in first team football. So in that regard, it's a slight risk, but I think you've got two exciting players who can come in and out the team and both play as number 9. I actually think they're quite different as players in terms of, one criticism of Hojlund last season was that he doesn't get involved enough in the game. People always talked about how few shots he had and bemoaned the service to him. But I do think he was a little bit responsible for that at times, whereas Zirkzee likes to get involved in the game. If you look at his statistics, I think he made 30 passes per game last season compared to 17 for Hojlund. Shots, it was 2.74 per game compared to 1.58 for Hojlund as well. And there's loads of statistics that show that Zirkzee's more involved in the game. So you are getting a different profile of striker.
Sticking with you, Ewan, with that different profile, do you think that Ten Hag may be looking, rather than looking for a number 1 striker and a number 2 striker, that he may be looking for a player who can just maybe offer something different in a different game. You know, maybe if you're playing a team lower in the table, you can get Hojlund, you can stick him up top and you can allow that service. Whereas if you're playing a team who might also be fighting for Champions League football, that Zirkzee could help link up that game a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's very true. You're going to have 2 strikers who are competing for one place. I don't think one player will go in as number 1 next season. I think it will come down to performances. There's not a huge difference between the players in terms of their ability. So whoever performs the best will get that jersey. And it could be horses for courses. And like we mentioned earlier, having 2 number 9s compared to 1 number 9, like last season, can only benefit Manchester United.
Stefan, how do you see this playing out for the competition between Zirkzee and Hojlund?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I completely agree with you. There were a number of games where Man United were kind of up against kind of top 4 opposition, and Hojlund looked really isolated. I actually think he's quite a selfless player at times. He often looked like he was kind of tussling with fullbacks out of the wings when the passing wasn't quite there in the final third. But I completely agree with you in that Zirkzee's probably a player who's better. He's a more mobile player. He kind of looks for gaps in the pitch. If I actually had to make a comparison to one of his compatriots, which is maybe a bit unfair, but the one that keeps coming to mind is actually Dirk Kuyt at Liverpool, who wasn't exactly a tremendous goal scorer, but he was just such a useful player for Liverpool. He was so good at being a kind of like, I don't know the best word about foil for other kind of forward players at Liverpool to kind of work off of. He was a workhorse is maybe the best word to use actually in that sense. So he's maybe not going to be, Erling Haaland kind of levels of goal scoring, but he could be a player who just kind of fills in the blanks in that Man United forward line and that gap between midfield and attack. And as you both mentioned, in those kind of top tier games where Man United have to sit deep, have to counter attack, and really kind of catch the likes of Manchester City or Arsenal on the break, Zirkzee might be a far better option. But equally, considering the way that Zirkzee does kind of float around the final third, there's no reason why you couldn't potentially play both of them alongside one another. One's a penalty box player, one's a second striker. We have seen Zirkzee plays a second striker. And if I'm not mistaken, he actually came through as a youth player, I think, as an inside forward, as a winger. So he's quite happy. It's quite natural for him to kind of drift around the final third. And I know that might complicate the formation because then you have to figure out what you do with Rashford in that system as well. But I think Zirkzee would have no problem playing alongside another striker. So, yeah, I think ultimately it just gives Ten Hag more options, which he just didn't have last season.
We know United are very busy at the other end of the pitch with links to Jared Brandtwaite, Matthijs de Ligt and Emmanuel Ugarte. Do you think if Joshua Zirkzee comes in, do you feel there's more work that needs to be done on that front line, or could that be Ten Hag's option set for the new season?
It really is going to depend on who leaves the club. So obviously there's huge speculation over the futures of the likes of Mason Greenwood's going to leave, Jadon Sancho will leave if they can get a buyer. I imagine that United will slap their hands off if a club comes in with a good offer for Antony as well. There's also still speculation over Marcus Rashford. The only kind of player outside of Hojlund who's kind of who's going to be there next season will be Alejandro Garnacho, and he could probably throw Ahmad into that equation as well. So yeah, there probably is still work to do. I think Manchester United would sign a new right winger if the money is there to do it. But we all know about the kind of PSR rules and how careful clubs have to be with their budgets. And I think that's another important factor in this signing. I think signing Joshua Zirkzee for €40 million is really good value in the current market compared to some of the prices you hear for other players that will allow United to go and spend maybe more in midfield, more in defence, and then maybe look at that right wing position. But if you look at it, if you have Rashford and Garnacho as your 2 options on the left, and if you have Hojlund and Zirkzee as your 2 number 9s, if you have Ahmad plus 1 more as your right wing options, I think that looks quite good in terms of where they've been a couple of seasons ago. You look at the profile of the players as well, they're all quite young. There's no players in their 30s, so they have kind of refreshed that area of the pitch quite well. But it will depend on who can go out, because it's going to be difficult to find a buyer for Jadon Sancho at the price Manchester United want. It's going to be even more difficult to find a buyer for Antony at the price of Manchester United want. So I think those 2 players will be key to bring in perhaps.
Let us know in the comments how you see Manchester United and Erik Ten Hag lining up that front 3 next season, and if you think Joshua Zirkzee will be a good addition. Hit that like button if you have enjoyed this chat, and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more from us throughout the summer window. But as always, thanks for watching.